Good morning, everyone, and welcome back. We are going to be talking about Chapter 17 in macroeconomics today. This is going to be about government budgets and fiscal policy. So we will talk about spending, we'll talk about taxation, we will talk about government programs, we'll talk about how the government raises money through taxes. We will talk about who is better at managing the economy, Republicans or Democrats. We're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. So let's dive in. If you want to pause me, pull out your notes for Chapter 17, which are found in the Files section of Canvas, and then we'll jump in. Okay. Government spending, 17.1. So here you can see the graph that represents government spending since about the mid-19th century, 20th century, until today. Maybe around 2015, actually. You can see that government spending hasn't really increased all that much, at least as a percentage of GDP. We started out at about 18 in the mid-50s and early 60s, and we're at about 20 today. 20% of the federal spending overall as a portion of our economy. You can see that it does fluctuate. A lot of this has to do with just simple automatic stabilizers. And we will also talk about these concepts today. Whenever things are going poorly economically, macroeconomically at least, automatic stabilizers kick in, and when things are going well, they also kick in. And help to adjust things without any legislation or policy or any action whatsoever being taken by the federal government. So we'll talk about some of those. But whenever you see spikes, this is generally we're hitting a recessionary period. The government is trying to push through neo-Keynesian policies and increase aggregate demand. Okay? A couple things about the chart. I would point out that social welfare programs like Social Security and health care and things of that sort are actually increasing as a proportion of our total government spending, while national defense has been decreasing post-Cold War, basically, and has stabilized at somewhere around 3% of our national budget. Remember that America spends about half of the entire world's military budget. So if you add up every other country on Earth, all of their military budgets, and compare it to the United States, they're just about equal. And so that 3% number of our budget is a little misleading. We spend a lot of money on our military budget. Anyway, you can sort of see how the patterns are working, right? Military expenditures are dropping a little bit and then have stabilized in the last 20 or 30 years. All the rest of the sort of social welfare spending is increasing. This is for a lot of reasons. One, we are getting older as a population. We're getting fatter and unhealthier as a population. And so things like healthcare spending, Social Security, and even things like Medicaid, Medicare, disability insurance, all of these things are rising as the United States population gets older and fatter and sicker. Okay. Okay, if you look at the pie chart, this is just a breakdown. It's a little more difficult to understand what's happening in the line chart. So if you just take a single year, 2014, and break down what the expenditures look like, this is a nice, simple graphic for understanding where our money is going. National defense, Social Security, healthcare, blah, blah, blah. Healthcare is rising over time. Again, this is because we are getting older and fatter as a society. We will touch on some of those things at the end of the lecture as well. It should also be pointed out that federal spending and state and local spending are incredibly different. They are not the same thing. They do not come from the same pools of money. They do not come from the same resources. They do not come from the same taxes, right? Federal taxes are going to be based on your income, on on corporate taxation, on things of that sort, mostly income tax. And then state and local taxes. Most states have a very small state income tax. Some states like Texas, where I live, do not. There are reasons on both sides for why that is. But most states get the vast proportion of their revenue from sales taxes. And our state actually implements a pretty high sales tax in lieu of an income tax. And a lot of people think this is a great thing. It's a great thing for rich people. It's really what it is called, at least theoretically, is a regressive tax, right? The poor people and middle class people have to spend larger and larger proportions of their income on goods, right? You just have to spend it. You can't just stick it in the bank because you can't live. You need that money, right? Whereas the rich people can just stick it in the bank, and so they don't actually have to pay taxes on it because they're not buying anything with it, right? So it's a regressive tax. The poorer you get, the more of your income is going to sales tax, basically. So it's a little disingenuous to say that it's a flat tax, which is sort of how they try to frame it. But if you think about the realities of the situation, it's a regressive tax. I would also point out that in this state and local spending, you'll notice that education spending is the largest proportion of their spending at the state and local level. I talked a little bit about this in the last chapter in my micro course, but we should talk about the implications of what this means and why this system was set up like this. It has largely school spending, at least not college, right? We're talking about grade school, elementary, middle school, high school. This schooling is 85 to 90% state funded and local funded. And the vast majority of that funding comes from local property tax, which says that, okay, you own this 1 acre and this $100,000 house, and since that comes up to $150,000 in total value, we have a 1% tax rate in our county, so you owe $1,500 to the county, and most of that is going to go to pay for your local school district where your house resides, right? What are the problems with this? The problems are that poor people live in poor houses that aren't worth anything and probably are even becoming worse and worse over time in value. And so they don't really have to pay any property taxes, and so their kids don't get any resources, and their schools are highly underfunded. And so the places that have the nicest houses also have the nicest schools, and there are extreme gaps in resources between rich and poor schools because of this property taxation system. And it was specifically set up in response to sort of the Civil Rights Acts, in response to Plessy v. Ferguson, in response to sort of equal but separate but equal, and all of the racial tension and the need for, I don't know, people misunderstand me, because this is the sort of thing that happens in any society when it is heterogeneous, right? It's not about white versus black. It's about majority versus minority, and this happens in any country where you have majority versus minority, and it happens to white people in Africa. You know, it's just about, I am a majority group and I'm going to treat the minority group like crap. And people misconstrue what I'm saying, and they think I'm picking on white people and saying they're racist. No, the world is racist. And it becomes more racist as people start to look different in your community. And you are less willing to share as a human being with minorities who live in your community. This is just a data-driven fact. I'm not trying to call you a racist, okay? I'm saying that humans are racist in general, and these are the natural outgrowths of that racism, setting up institutionally racist societies. And this happens in South Africa, it happens in Zimbabwe, it happens in China, it happens in America, it happens in Canada. It doesn't matter where you are. These things happen, and just saying that, I don't know, trying to claim that I'm trying to call you a racist is sort of silly. I'm just pointing out the fact that this is something that happens across societies, okay? The majority group does not like sharing resources with others, okay? Somebody got really pissy with me the other day about my lecture, and I'm like, well, if you listened closer, you would have understood. But instead, you got, what do they call that, baby, when you get
defensive?
Defensive, but there's a word for it. Man, you're triggered. Somebody got triggered over it, and they didn't actually listen to what I was saying. And they thought that I was calling them a racist. And in a sense I was, but I'm calling all human beings racist, okay? Anyway, so we're moving on. I think it's really important that you understand how school funding works in America and why it is set up in an institutionally racist way historically. This sort of thing happens across the planet, okay? Taxation, section 17.2. Let's see. These are the different taxation methods that can be used by our state or any state, basically. And if you look at the yellow highlighted area down here, type of taxes, we'll sort of walk through them. So first you have personal income taxes. These are the ones that you have to file at the end of every year. In April, I think actually tomorrow is the deadline, and I'm stuck in my hotel and still haven't filed my taxes, so I really need to get on it tomorrow. Personal income taxes, most people, I'd say about 40%, don't actually pay anything into the system because of the many sort of write-offs that exist in our tax code for the earned income child credit, the earned income tax credit, all of these sorts of things for middle class and lower class people. You have the payroll tax, which everyone pays. This is most of taxation in America comes from personal income tax and payroll tax. And this is one that just comes straight out of your check. By law, your employer actually has to match your contribution to the payroll tax, and this is a way that they can fund things like Social Security, Medicaid, workers' compensation insurance, pension insurance in case your company goes bankrupt. They can't just like walk away and say, well, your pension's gone. So these are ways that the government can help protect some of those things. Everyone, if you work, you pay this unless you're basically paid under the table, which is illegal, sort of a cash payout job. Or I know some illegal immigrants sort of work this sort of thing, but they'll just pay them under the table. So those are the few people who would get away with not paying this. I should also mention that Social Security is part of this, and Social Security works in that you pay 12.5% of income, and your company matches. This is all pulled out of your basically your payroll tax. Social Security is part of that, and then you pay your Social Security tax all the way up to in 2021. The new number is $140,000 for an individual. So you pay your Social Security taxes from the first dollar you make to the $140,000th that you make, and then from $140,001 to infinite dollars, you don't pay a single dime in Social Security tax. And this is one of the reasons that our Social Security system is so underfunded, because there's been this change to the way that it is taxed, so that the super rich can get away with not having to pay for this system. It's a really weird loophole that has been just basically bought and paid for through lobbying, that a lot of economists are saying has got to close, or none of these social programs. It's just going to drain all of these social programs. Why are the super rich getting away with not having to help contribute to pensions? It's a weird thing. And I'm sure there's arguments on one side or the other. If you like the idea of not having to pay over $140,000, write a paper about it. I'd love to read it. I'd like to know what the other side's argument is. I'm sure it's about, we're not going to actually need to use that Social Security system. And so, even though they do have access to it, and they will be sent their check. And so, maybe we shouldn't be paying on these extraordinarily high incomes. I don't know. It seems weird to me. But if you're interested, write a paper. I'd love to read it. Okay, here we go. There's also the aging problem and immigration. This is something else that we should talk about. When Social Security was passed in 1935, 1936, in the middle of the Great Depression under FDR, when it was passed, only about 1 in 13 to 1 in 14 people qualified, right? Were above 65 years old. Today, or right around 2015, it was 1 in 8 Americans are now qualifying for Social Security and are 65 years older or older. And in 25 to 30 years, 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 years or older. And this is for multiple reasons. First, humans in America and humans in general are living longer, right? We live much longer on average than we did in 1935 when this law was written, right? Another problem is that the more developed a society gets, the fewer children that its families have. And so this is one of the arguments for immigration, at least for those proponents of the Social Security system, is that, look, we're not going to have enough people to even be paying into the system to keep it manageable unless we have immigration, because American families are not having kids. Only the poorest of American families are having kids. This is something that we see across the developed world. As incomes increase, the need for children to work on farms and things like this change. Your own perceptions on Maslow's hierarchy and what you want to do with your life start to change. And the number of children that the average couple has are reduced dramatically to below replacement levels, especially if you look like at a country like South Korea or Japan, which is having serious problems with their elderly. Their elderly are starting to take over their society because no one will have kids. And some of the Eastern European countries and countries like Japan and South Korea are even now paying people to have children. We will give you money. I'll buy you a friggin' minivan. I've seen like Latvia and Lithuania do this. We will send you $20,000 this year. We'll buy you a minivan for your family. Please have kids. Our population is shrinking. And we have no tax revenue coming in because the number of elderly is growing every single day. The people dropping out of the system and basically soaking up social welfare because they're past that retirement age. So this is a really interesting phenomenon that we're seeing in the developing world, the developed world. And it's a phenomenon that countries that don't allow immigration, like highly xenophobic Japan, have serious issues with because they are not getting worker replacement. So basically it's a one-for-one exchange. For every one person who retires, you're just losing that person. And so the balance is shifting dramatically towards soaking money up from the system rather than actually contributing from the young and healthy, because there are no more young and healthy. Not no more, but it's just reducing every day. So very, very interesting phenomenon, and a whole lot of different things touching on what's happening, right? From gerontology to human development to human psychology to all kinds of stuff. So really, really interesting stuff that we're going to be watching for the next 15 to 20 years, and we don't really know a whole lot about how this is going to affect us yet, because the world has yet to have gone through this sort of thing, right? I mean, it's always been everyone on Earth is poor and starving and having 19 kids because 6 of them will die in childbirth, and we need them to farm, and we need them to feed us when we're old. The world is not like that anymore, and it's causing dramatic changes. So, another interesting paper if you're looking for stuff to write about. We have corporate taxes. Corporate taxes were reduced pretty dramatically under Donald Trump, from like 35% to 22%. It was one of the largest cuts in the history of the world on corporate taxes. So I still don't think the numbers are in or the science is in about what the effects of this are going to be. We'll see. I'm not going to tell you it's good or bad one way or another. I don't know. No one really knows. So we'll see. Excise taxes are often known as sin taxes, and these are just taxes on like cigarettes, booze. For the new pot industry, I'm sure states are collecting taxes, not only sales taxes and things, but also excise taxes. What would be some other ones? I know, like in the Netherlands, where you can buy some drugs, they'll have excise taxes on those. But I think you get the point. Estate taxes, this is when you pass, and like we were talking about in the econ extras, at this point I think it was $1.4 million. You don't pay any tax on a gift or on death on the first $1.4 million of your income. And then finally you have tariff and inspection fees, and these are small fees that importers have to pay to have their goods inspected. All right, moving on. All right, we're going to move on to section 17.4, and we will talk about expansionary and contractionary policy, and then I will close up with a discussion on automatic welfare stabilizers, and then a few comments of my own on some research on this stuff. Okay, so you can see that figure 17.10 is highly representative of the supply side stuff that we've been talking about so far, with a vertical LRAS, the long run aggregate supply model. And so the hope, right, for an economic manager like a Fed chairman or the Treasury chair or the president, whatever it is, the hope is that you're always pushing that LRAS out, right? The LRAS is stable and it's always vertical. But the hope is that we can continually grow our economy and push it further and further to the right, which means we'll be further pushing our GDP larger and larger, right? That's the hope, and this is the hope, especially during the sort of the neocon perspective, right? The idea that no matter what happens with demand, we are running at our PPC, our production possibilities frontier curve. That's where we're at right now. We're not in a recessionary period. There's no need for Keynesian economics. And so how do we push that LRAS out? Some ways of doing this are investing in research and development, investing in things like infrastructure, things that can increase our potential as a society, right? That can actually push that vertical long-run aggregate supply line further to the right and grow our economy. And that's during sort of the expansionary period, right? We want to lower taxes, we want to probably raise taxes so that we can pull in more money from the system, keep inflation from getting out of control, and then incentivize growing particular aspects of our economy, like infrastructure, research and development, all of these things that can bolster our long-term growth as a society. So this, like I said, this might include infrastructure, it might include research and development, it might include things like human capital, education, training, these sorts of things, okay? So that's what we want to be doing when we have a healthy, growing economy. When we have a recession and we are more toward that neo-Keynesian side of the equation, then we want to reduce taxes, we want to spend more money as a government and just get money out there into people's hands to be bolstering demand, so we can get back to that LRAS, that neocon sort of viewpoint of okay, now we're at full productive capacity. How do we get back to just growing our full productive capacity? Okay. Okay, I assigned a couple questions and even an extra credit paper about automatic welfare stabilizers. This is one of the most important concepts in all of economics, and this is the one where everybody got triggered and they wanted to talk about welfare, but it's not about welfare. I know it includes the word welfare, but the concept of automatic welfare stabilizers are not about welfare. It is about the welfare of the aggregate economy, okay? And so these are policies that a government can put into place where, regardless of where the economy is, if it's growing or it's shrinking, these are policies that will be adjusting constantly, automatically, without any new policy or legislation or discussion or debate or anything from politicians to try and keep the economy going, because we know how difficult that can be and how seemingly useless it can be, because it's all tied to politics and local districts and bringing pork back home, and that isn't necessarily the answer to fixing an economy, right? And so we have built in automatic welfare stabilizers over time that, as we have been talking about over the last 70 or so years, the economy in general has become far more stable. It just sort of dips like this and rises like this, rather than these huge swings that we were getting in the 1930s and 1940s, and even bigger before that, when we don't really have a lot of like actual tracked data, but we can look at historical texts and stuff and go, holy crap, that things were really bad back then. Now those vicissitudes and swings don't occur to nearly the same extent, and this is exactly because of automatic welfare stabilizers. So what happens is, this is neo-Keynesian policy just written into law. When the government starts to collapse and unemployment increases, unemployment benefits automatically kick in, start helping people, keep the economy from completely being devastated, and start to bolster demand, increase production, helps to increase hiring again, right? And then when that hiring starts to increase, and the federal government and the federal economy and the aggregate economy start to become stable again, and unemployment reduces, right? All of that unemployment that was being sent out is being sucked back into the system. It's not being spent anymore. And now we're collecting more taxes because more people are getting back to work, right? And so this is an incredibly simple, automatic, and effective, efficient mechanism for ensuring that our economy does not get too out of control. It just sends money into the system, whether it be welfare or tax cuts or automatic grants to companies for employment and hiring, or all kinds of things. It's not just welfare policy, and it's not just about welfare policy. It is about the welfare of the economy. So again, stop getting triggered when you read these things. I have, again, had to tell students, stop sending me your creeds on independent welfare. That's not even what it's about. Drives me crazy, guys. Anyway, all right, so we'll move on. Now you understand the concept. Please do a little more research when you're asked a question, and you send me an answer that has literally nothing to do with the question I asked you, okay? All right. The very last part we'll talk about are balanced budgets. Are they a good thing? And this is mixed. They can be a good thing, right? Because it can ensure that your government isn't getting too out of hand, that your GDP, that your budget to GDP ratio isn't at 100 or 120 or 140% like it can be in some smaller African and Latin American countries where things really start to get out of hand, right? You're talking about decades before you'll ever be able to pay any of their stuff back. On the other hand, it ties your hands as a politician and as a government leader, right? If I am by law guaranteed that I have to have a balanced budget, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Because if we're in a recessionary period and I want to be sending money out, whether to corporations or through tax cuts or to individuals to stimulate demand, then it also means that I'm going to have to be raising taxes dramatically, which is just going to completely negate everything that I just did, right? And so it doesn't make any sense. And we wouldn't be getting surpluses either. So during the boom times, when government should be stocking back money for bad times, we can't even collect surpluses. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, honestly. Economists hate this sort of idea. It's really easy to sell a simple idea like this to your voters because they're not very informed. And honestly, a lot of the politicians themselves aren't very informed. Let's be perfectly honest. They don't know what they're talking about. And so this sort of idea can get people in real trouble. And this is one of the reasons that Texas has been in real trouble, is because we have a balanced budget law and we can't invest in our energy segment, in our schools, in anything, basically, unless we want to raise taxes. And this is Texas. That's not happening, right? And so we're doomed to garbage services forever under the auspices of this balanced budget law. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's my piece, and I think that most economists would agree with me, at least from everything that I've read and studied. Who manages economies better? This is a really touchy one. You guys are going to love this. Democrats, period. And I know that's probably going to make some of you very mad, but Democrats, from basically any data perspective that you can imagine, Democrats run the economy better than Republicans. Republicans are irresponsible. They constantly cut our tax base out from under us. And so there are bukus of research out there from Republicans themselves. There's a guy named Larry Bartels who is a diehard conservative who started a book about who runs economies better because he wanted to show that Republicans did. And by the end of the book, he's like, man, this sucks. Because, I'm a scientist, and as much as I would love to say Republicans are better because I believe in that political philosophy, I'm 100% wrong. And there's been lots and lots of research come out that says Bartels and others like Blinder and Watson of Princeton University and others from Stanford, there's very little evidence that Republicans run the macro economy better than Democrats. And part of it is because they trap themselves with their philosophy. Their philosophy doesn't make a lot of sense. You can't just cut taxes forever. It doesn't work like that. I'm sorry. Modern economics doesn't work like that. If we want to go back to the Stone Age, where everybody just takes care of themselves and people are dying of dysentery and anarchy, I guess. But if you want a modern economy and a modern society, then you have to have nuance, and Republicans aren't very much into nuance. So anyway, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. If you disagree with anything that I had to say today, go out and find some research and write a paper about it. I'd love to read it. Have a wonderful day, and I'll get the next one up soon. Bye.